Japan's story begins long before the rise of emperors, samurai, or bustling cities. It begins with the land itself, a chain of islands born from fire and water, shaped by volcanoes and earthquakes over millions of years. As the Ice Age ended, and the climate warmed, forests spread across the islands, rivers carved deep valleys, and the land became rich with life. Deer, wild boar, fish, and birds filled the forests and rivers, and the stage was set for the arrival of the first people. The earliest humans reached Japan at least 35,000 years ago, crossing land bridges from the Asian mainland when sea levels were lower. These Paleolithic people lived in small groups, moving with the seasons, hunting animals, gathering wild plants, and making simple stone tools. They built shelters from wood and animal skins, used fire for warmth and cooking, and left behind stone blades, arrowheads, and traces of their campsites. For thousands of years, these early people survived in a harsh and changing world, adapting to the land and its challenges. Around 14,000 years ago, a remarkable transformation began. People in Japan started to settle in one place for longer periods, building pit dwellings partly dug into the ground for warmth and protection. They began to make pottery, some of the oldest in the world, decorated with cord-marked patterns that gave the Jomon period its name. The Jomon people were skilled hunter-gatherers and fishers. They gathered nuts, berries, and roots from the forests, hunted deer and wild boar with bows and arrows, and fished in rivers and along the coast using hooks, nets, and traps. Shellfish were an important part of their diet, and huge shell mounds, called keizuka, can still be found today. Jomon pottery is famous for its beauty and variety. Some pots were simple and practical, used for cooking or storage, while others were decorated with elaborate patterns, twisted ropes, and even animal shapes. These pots were not just tools. They were works of art, and they tell us much about Jomon life. The Jomon people lived in small villages, often near rivers or the sea. A typical village might have a dozen or more pit dwellings arranged in a circle or oval, with a communal area in the center for gatherings, rituals, or ceremonies. The Jomon buried their dead in special ways, sometimes with grave goods like beads, tools, or pottery. Jomon society was complex and rich in tradition. People worked together to hunt, gather, and build their homes. They shared food and resources, and there is evidence of trade between villages. Jomon people made jewelry from shells, bones, and stones, and they carved figurines called dogu, small clay statues with mysterious shapes and patterns. No one knows exactly what the dogu meant, but many scholars believe they were used in rituals, or as charms for health, fertility, or protection. Some dogu have large eyes, strange bodies, or animal features, connecting the Jomon people to the spirit world, to nature, and to their ancestors. The Jomon also created stone circles and other monuments, which may have been used for ceremonies, festivals, or to mark important places. The Jomon believed in the power of nature, the sun, moon, mountains, rivers, and trees. They may have worshipped spirits called kami, a belief that would later become central to Shinto, Japan's native religion. For thousands of years, the Jomon people lived in harmony with the land, adapting to its rhythms and respecting its power. Around 1000 BC, a new wave of people began to arrive in Japan from the Asian mainland. These newcomers brought new skills and ideas, most importantly, rice farming. They also brought metal tools, weaving, and new ways of building houses. The arrival of the Yayoi people marked the beginning of a great transformation. Rice paddies appeared in the lowlands, and villages grew larger and more organized. The Jomon way of life slowly faded, replaced by new customs, technologies, and beliefs. But the Jomon legacy did not disappear. Many elements of Jomon culture pottery, respect for nature, and spiritual beliefs continue to influence Japanese society for centuries to come. By around 300 BC, the Yayoi culture had spread across most of Japan. The Jomon people either blended with the newcomers or moved to more remote areas. The age of hunter-gatherers was ending, and the age of farmers and village chiefs was beginning. The Jomon period lasted for more than 10,000 years, one of the longest continuous cultures in human history. The Jomon people left behind a rich legacy of art, tradition, and mystery. Their story is the foundation of Japanese civilization. The story of prehistoric Japan is a story of adaptation, creativity, and survival. From the first hunters who crossed the land bridges to the artists who shaped clay into beautiful pots, the people of ancient Japan built a unique and enduring culture. As the Jomon period ended and the Yayoi era began, Japan was ready for the next chapter, a time of powerful clans, rising kingdoms, and the birth of the Japanese state. After the long era of the Jomon people, Japan began to change in ways that would shape its future forever. The newcomers from the Asian mainland, known as the Yayoi, brought with them the secrets of rice farming, metalworking, and new ways of living. As the Yayoi people settled across the islands, they transformed the land. They cleared forests, built irrigation channels, and planted rice paddies in the lowlands. Villages grew larger, and for the first time, people began to live in organized communities with leaders and rules. The Yayoi people made tools and weapons from bronze and iron, spun cloth from hemp and silk, and built houses with raised floors to protect against floods and pests. Their pottery was simpler than the Jomon's, but their technology was more advanced. The arrival of rice farming changed everything. Rice was not just food. It was wealth, power, and the foundation of society. Those who controlled the rice fields became the leaders of their villages, and soon, powerful families began to compete for land and influence thought as the centuries passed. These families formed alliances and rivalries, and small kingdoms began to appear. The most powerful of these clans was the Yamato, who settled in the fertile plains of central Honshu. The Yamato clan claimed descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu, and their leaders became the first emperors of Japan. The Yamato rulers united many of the local clans under their authority, using both force and diplomacy. They built great burial mounds called kofun, massive earthen tombs shaped like keyholes, some surrounded by moats and filled with treasures. These kofuns still dot the Japanese landscape today, silent witnesses to the rise of the first Japanese state. The Yamato period, which began around the 3rd century AD, was a time of great change and innovation. The Yamato court sent envoys to China and Korea, eager to learn from the advanced civilizations on the continent. They brought back new ideas about government, writing, religion, and art. The Chinese writing system, known as kanji, was introduced to Japan, allowing people to record laws, poetry, and history for the first time. Buddhism arrived from Korea and China, bringing new beliefs, rituals, and images of peace and compassion. The Japanese people blended these foreign ideas with their own traditions, creating a unique culture that was both open to the world and deeply rooted in the land. The Yamato rulers established a system of government based on Chinese models. They created ranks and titles for officials, built palaces and temples, and issued laws to organize society. The emperor was seen as a divine figure, the descendant of the gods and the center of the nation. But real power often rested with the great clans who controlled the land and the armies. The Yamato court was a place of ceremony, music, and poetry, but also of intrigue, ambition, and rivalry. Religion played a central role in ancient Japan. The native beliefs, known as Shinto, focused on the worship of kami spirits of nature, ancestors, and sacred places. Shrines were built to honor the kami, and rituals were performed to ensure good harvests, health, and protection from disaster. With the arrival of Buddhism, new temples rose beside the old shrines, and monks traveled the land teaching about suffering, compassion, and the path to enlightenment. The two religions coexisted, sometimes blending together, sometimes competing for influence. As the Yamato state grew stronger, it expanded its reach across the islands. The court sent armies to conquer rival clans and bring distant regions under imperial control. They fought wars in Kyushu and northern Honshu, and even launched expeditions to the Korean peninsula. The Yamato rulers claimed the title of Great King of War, and their envoys were recognized by the emperors of China. Trade flourished, and Japanese merchants exchanged goods with Korea, China, and beyond. Silk, bronze mirrors, swords, and jewels flowed into Japan, while Japanese crafts and raw materials found their way to foreign lands. Society in ancient Japan was organized into clans, or yuji, each with its own leaders, traditions, and sacred objects. The most powerful clans served the emperor, while others ruled their own territories. Below the nobles were the common people, farmers, artisans, and fishermen who worked the land and paid taxes in rice and labor. Slavery existed, and prisoners of war or criminals could be forced to serve the powerful. Life was hard for most people, but festivals, music, and poetry brought moments of joy and beauty. The Yamato period also saw the creation of Japan's earliest myths and legends. Stories of gods and heroes, of creation and adventure, were passed down through generations. These tales were eventually written down in the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, Japan's oldest books of history and myth. The stories of Izanagi and Izanami, who created the islands, of Amaterasu, the sun goddess, and of the brave prince Yamato Takeru, became the foundation of Japanese identity. By the end of the Yamato period, Japan had become a unified state with a divine emperor, a complex society, and a culture that blended native and foreign influences. The seeds of Japanese civilization had been planted, and the stage was set for the next great era, the age of classical Japan, when the arts, literature, and government would reach new heights. As the Yamato state grew in power and confidence, Japan entered a new era of transformation and creativity. The centuries that followed are known as the Classical Age of Japan, a time when the foundations of Japanese culture, government, and art were laid. This period began with the Asuka era, when the rulers of Japan looked to China and Korea for inspiration and guidance. They sent envoys and students across the sea to learn about the great Tang dynasty, its laws, its writing, its architecture, and its religion. The Japanese court adopted many Chinese customs, including the use of Chinese characters for writing, the structure of government, and the building of grand temples and palaces. Buddhism, which had arrived from Korea, flourished under imperial patronage. Monks and artisans from the continent brought new ideas, images, and rituals. The Japanese built magnificent temples such as Haryuji, the oldest wooden building in the world, and filled them with statues of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas. The teachings of Buddhism blended with native Shinto beliefs, creating a unique spiritual landscape where kami and Buddhas were worshipped side by side. The Asuka period was also a time of reform and centralization. The Taika reforms, inspired by Chinese models, sought to strengthen the power of the emperor and create a more orderly society. Land was declared the property of the state, and a system of provinces and districts was established. Officials were appointed by the court, and taxes were collected in rice and labor. The emperor became the symbolic head of the nation, but real power often rested with powerful clans such as the Soga and Fujiwara, who controlled the court and its politics. The struggle for influence led to intrigue, alliances, and sometimes violence, as rival families vied for supremacy. In the early 8th century, the Japanese court moved its capital to Nara, a city modeled after the great Chinese capital of Chang'an. Nara became the center of government, religion, and culture. The city was filled with temples, shrines, and palaces, and its streets bustled with officials, monks, merchants, and artisans. The imperial court sponsored the compilation of Japan's earliest histories, the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, which recorded the myths, legends, and genealogies of the imperial family and the great clans. These works established the divine origins of the emperor and the legitimacy of the Yamato line. Buddhism reached new heights in Nara with the construction of the Great Buddha of Todaiji, a colossal bronze statue that symbolized the unity and power of the nation. Monasteries became centers of learning, art, and political influence. Monks advised the emperor, and some even tried to seize power for themselves. The court responded by moving the capital again, this time to Han-kyo, the city now known as Kyoto. The Heian period, which lasted from 794 to 1185, is remembered as the golden age of Japanese court culture. The imperial court became a world of elegance, refinement, and beauty. Aristocrats lived in grand mansions surrounded by gardens, ponds, and cherry trees. They wore elaborate robes, wrote poetry, and played music. The art of calligraphy, painting, and flower arranging flourished. The court was governed by strict rules of etiquette, and every gesture, word, and glance was carefully measured. The Han aristocrats were obsessed with beauty and sensitivity. They wrote diaries and novels that captured the fleeting moments of life, the sadness of passing seasons, and the joys and sorrows of love. The most famous of these works is The Tale of Genji, written by the noblewoman Murasaki Shikibu. This masterpiece is often called the world's first novel, and it paints a vivid picture of court life, romance, and intrigue. The Heian period also saw the development of kana, the Japanese syllabary, which made it possible to write the Japanese language more easily and expressively. Women played a major role in the literary and artistic life of the court, and their voices are preserved in poems, diaries, and stories that still move readers today. While the court in Kyoto pursued beauty and pleasure, the rest of Japan was changing in other ways. Powerful provincial families, known as the bushi or samurai, began to rise in the countryside. They built private armies, managed estates, and protected their lands from bandits and rivals. The imperial court relied on these warriors to maintain order, but over time, the samurai gained more power and independence. The Fujiwara clan, who dominated the court for centuries, used marriage alliances and political skill to control the emperor and the government. But as the Han period drew to a close, their grip weakened, and new forces began to challenge the old order. The classical age of Japan was a time of great achievement and lasting influence. The arts, literature, and religion of the Asuka, Nara, and Heian periods shaped the soul of Japan. The ideals of harmony, beauty, and sensitivity became central to Japanese identity. But beneath the surface, tensions were growing. The rise of the samurai, the decline of central authority, and the struggles of the common people set the stage for a new era of conflict and transformation. As the Han period drew to a close, the elegant world of the imperial court in Kyoto began to lose its grip on the country. The power of the emperor and the aristocrats was fading, and a new force was rising in the provinces. These were the samurai, the warrior class of Japan, who would come to dominate the nation for centuries. The samurai were not born into power. They earned it through strength, loyalty, and skill in battle. They were the protectors of the land, the enforcers of order, and the champions of their lords. Their code of honor, known as Bushido, demanded courage, discipline, and loyalty unto death. The samurai lived by the sword, and their lives were shaped by the constant threat of war and the pursuit of glory. The roots of the samurai can be traced back to the provincial families who managed estates and protected their lands from bandits and rivals during the Heian period. As the central government weakened, these families built private armies and established their own domains. The most powerful of these clans were the Taira and the Minamoto, whose rivalry would plunge Japan into a period of civil war and upheaval. The struggle between the Taira and Minamoto clans reached its climax in the late 12th century, in a conflict known as the Genpei War. This war was not just a battle for power. It was a clash of cultures, values, and visions for Japan's future. The Taira were closely connected to the imperial court and the old aristocratic order, while the Minamoto represented the rising power of the samurai and the provinces. The Genpei War raged across the country, with battles fought on land and sea, in mountains and valleys, and even in the streets of Kyoto. The war was brutal and devastating, leaving villages burned, families torn apart, and thousands dead. The most famous battle of the war was the Battle of Dan-no-ura, a dramatic naval clash in 1185 that ended with the defeat of the Taira and the death of the young emperor Antoku. The Minamoto emerged victorious, and their leader, Minamoto no Yoritomo, became the most powerful man in Japan. Yoritomo did not seek to become emperor. Instead, he established a new form of government, the shogunate, with its headquarters in Kamakura, far from the imperial court in Kyoto. The emperor remained as a symbolic figure, but real power now rested with the shogun, the military ruler of Japan. This was the beginning of the Kamakura period, a time when the samurai ruled the land and the old aristocratic order faded into the background. The Kamakura shogunate was a government built on military strength and loyalty. The shogun appointed his own vassals, known as gokunin, to manage the provinces and enforce his will. The samurai were rewarded with land and privileges, but they were also bound by strict codes of loyalty and service. The shogunate created a system of law and order, with courts, police, and a network of communication that stretched across the country. The Kamakura period was also a time of spiritual change. Buddhism, which had flourished in the Heian court, now spread among the samurai and the common people. New sects such as Zen, Pure Land, and Nichiren Buddhism offered different paths to enlightenment and salvation. Zen Buddhism, with its emphasis on meditation, discipline, and direct experience, became especially popular among the samurai. The teachings of Zen shaped the samurai's approach to life and death, to art and combat, and to the pursuit of mastery. In all things, the Kamakura period was not a time of peace. The shogunate faced constant threats from rival clans, rebellious vassals, and the ever-present danger of natural disasters. The most dramatic challenge came from outside Japan, when the Mongol Empire, the most powerful force in the world at the time, set its sights on the islands in 1274 and again in 1281. The Mongols launched massive invasions of Japan, sending fleets of ships and tens of thousands of soldiers across the sea. The samurai fought bravely to defend their homeland, but they were outnumbered and outmatched by the Mongol armies. Yet, in both invasions, typhoons struck the Mongol fleets, sinking ships and scattering the invaders. The Japanese called these storms kamikaze, or divine wind, believing that the gods had saved their country. The failed Mongol invasions became a source of national pride and a symbol of Japan's unique destiny. The cost of defense, however, strained the resources of the shogunate. The samurai who had fought to protect Japan received little reward, and discontent grew among the warrior class. The authority of the shogun weakened, and rival clans began to challenge his rule. In the early 14th century, a series of conflicts erupted between the shogunate and the imperial court, as well as among the samurai themselves. The Emperor Go-Daigo attempted to restore imperial power, leading to a period of civil war known as the Nambokucho, or Northern and Southern Courts period. For decades, rival emperors and shoguns fought for control, and the country was divided and unstable. Out of this chaos emerged a new shogunate, led by the Ashikaga clan. The Ashikaga shogunate, also known as the Muromachi shogunate, moved its headquarters to the Muromachi district of Kyoto. The Ashikaga shoguns tried to balance the power of the samurai with the traditions of the imperial court. They supported the arts, sponsored the construction of temples and gardens, and encouraged trade with China and Korea. The Muromachi period was a time of both cultural brilliance and political instability. The shoguns were often weak and real. Power shifted to the regional lords or daimyo, who ruled their own domains with little interference from the central government. The daimyo built castles, raised armies, and competed for land and influence. The samurai became the backbone of these regional armies, serving their lords with loyalty and skill. The arts flourished during the Muromachi period. Zen Buddhism inspired new forms of painting, poetry, and garden design. The tea ceremony, or shano, became a symbol of refinement and discipline. No theater, with its masks, music, and stylized movements, told stories of gods, warriors, and ghosts. The culture of the samurai was shaped by both the sword and the brush, by the demands of war and the pursuit of beauty. But beneath the surface, tensions were growing. The daimyo became more powerful and independent, and the shogunate struggled to maintain control. In the late 15th century, a conflict over succession to the shogunate erupted into the Onin War, a devastating civil war that destroyed much of Kyoto and plunged the country into chaos. The Onin War marked the beginning of the Sengoku, or Warring States period, a time of constant warfare, shifting alliances, and the rise and fall of powerful warlords. The age of the samurai had reached its peak, but the unity of Japan was shattered. The country was divided into dozens of competing domains, each ruled by a daimyo with his own army of samurai. Castles rose on hilltops, and battles raged across the land. The people suffered, but the spirit of the samurai endured. The Kamakura and Muromachi periods were times of great change and challenge for Japan. The rise of the samurai transformed the country, creating a society built on loyalty, discipline, and the pursuit of mastery. The shogunate brought order and stability, but also sowed the seeds of future conflict. The arts and culture of the samurai age left a lasting legacy, shaping the soul of Japan for generations to come. As the country descended into the chaos of the warring states, new leaders would rise to seek unity and peace. The story of Japan was far from over, and the age of the samurai would leave its mark on the nation's history, identity, and imagination. The Sengoku period, known as the Warring States era, was one of the most dramatic and turbulent chapters in Japanese history. For more than a century, Japan was a land torn apart by war, ambition, betrayal, and the relentless struggle for power. The unity that had once been established by the shogunate was shattered, and the country was divided into dozens of domains, each ruled by a powerful daimyo, or warlord. These daimyo commanded their own armies of samurai, built massive castles, and dreamed of uniting Japan under their own banners. The Sengoku period began in the mid-15th century, after the Onin War devastated Kyoto and left the central government in ruins. The Ashikaga shogunate, once the symbol of order, became weak and irrelevant. The emperor remained a figurehead, while real power shifted to the provinces. The daimyo seized the opportunity to expand their territories, challenge their rivals, and assert their independence. Alliances were made and broken with dizzying speed, and the land was constantly in flux. Life during the Sengoku period was harsh and uncertain. Villages were often caught in the crossfire between warring armies. Farmers were forced to pay heavy taxes to support their lord's ambitions, and many were conscripted to fight as foot soldiers, known as ashigaru. Castles rose on hilltops and plains, serving as both fortresses and symbols of a daimyo's power. These castles were marvels of engineering, with stone walls, moats, and intricate defenses designed to withstand siege and attack. The samurai, once the loyal retainers of a single lord, now found themselves navigating a world of shifting loyalties and constant danger. Some rose to great heights through bravery and cunning, while others fell victim to betrayal or defeat. The code of Bushido was still honored, but the realities of war often demanded flexibility and pragmatism. The art of the sword was matched by the art of diplomacy, and the most successful daimyo were those who could master both. The Sengoku period was also a time of innovation and change. New weapons and tactics transformed the battlefield. The introduction of firearms, known as tanegashima, by Portuguese traders in the mid-16th century, revolutionized warfare. Daimyo who quickly adopted these new weapons gained a decisive edge over their rivals. Battles became larger and more complex, with thousands of soldiers, cavalry charges, and volleys of musket fire. The era also saw the rise of ninja, or shinobi, who served as spies, assassins, and saboteurs. These shadowy figures became legendary for their stealth, cunning, and mastery of unconventional warfare. The ninja operated in the shadows, gathering intelligence, spreading rumors, and striking at key targets. Their exploits became the stuff of myth and legend, shaping the popular image of the Sengoku period for centuries to come. Amidst the chaos, three extraordinary leaders emerged who would change the course of Japanese history. The first was Oda Nobunaga, a ruthless and brilliant daimyo from Owari province. Nobunaga was a master of strategy and innovation. He was one of the first to fully embrace firearms, using them to devastating effect in battles such as Nagashino. Nobunaga was relentless in his quest for power, crushing his enemies with speed and ferocity. He broke the power of the Buddhist warrior monks, destroyed rival clans, and marched on Kyoto, seizing control of the capital. Nobunaga's ambition was to unify Japan, and he came closer than anyone before him. But his rise was cut short by betrayal. In 1582, one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, turned against him. Nobunaga was forced to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, as his castle burned around him. His death sent shockwaves through the land, but his vision of unity did not die with him. The second great unifier was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a man of humble origins who rose from peasant to supreme ruler through sheer talent and determination. Hideyoshi avenged Nobunaga's death, defeated Mitsuhide, and continued the campaign to bring all of Japan under one rule. Hideyoshi was a master of both war and diplomacy. He persuaded or forced rival daimyo to submit, built magnificent castles such as Osaka, and reformed the social order. Hideyoshi introduced a rigid class system, separating samurai from farmers, and conducted a great sword hunt to disarm the peasantry. He also dreamed of expanding Japan's power beyond its shores, launching invasions of Korea in the 1590s. These campaigns ultimately failed, draining resources and costing many lives. But they demonstrated Hideyoshi's ambition and the reach of his authority. Hideyoshi's rule brought a measure of peace and stability to Japan, but his death in 1598 left a power vacuum that threatened to plunge the country back into chaos. The third and final unifier was Tokugawa Ieyasu, a patient and cunning strategist, who outlasted his rivals and seized the ultimate prize. After Hideyoshi's death, Japan was once again divided between powerful factions. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, the largest and most important battle in Japanese history. Ieyasu's forces triumphed, and he emerged as the undisputed master of Japan. In 1603, the emperor granted Ieyasu the title of shogun, and the Tokugawa shogunate was born. The Sengoku period was over, and a new era of peace and order had begun. Sengoku period was not only a time of war and ambition, it was also an age of cultural flowering. The constant movement of people and ideas led to the spread of new art forms, literature, and religious practices. The tea ceremony, perfected by masters such as Sen no Rikyu, became a symbol of harmony, discipline, and the beauty of simplicity. No and Kabuki theater entertained audiences with stories of love, tragedy, and heroism. The arts of painting, calligraphy, and poetry flourished, reflecting both the turbulence and the refinement of the age. Religion played a complex role in the Sengoku period. Buddhism, Shinto, and new sects such as Nichiren and Pure Land vied for influence. The arrival of Christian missionaries from Europe introduced yet another faith to the mix. Some daimyo converted to Christianity, attracted by the promise of trade and new technology, while others saw the foreign religion as a threat. The Tokugawa shogunate would later suppress Christianity, but for a time, churches and crosses dotted the Japanese landscape. Society during the Sengoku period was marked by both hardship and opportunity. The constant wars brought suffering to the common people, but they also created chances for social mobility. Talented individuals could rise from humble origins to positions of power and wealth. The rigid class system of earlier times was shaken, and the boundaries between samurai, farmers, and merchants became more fluid. Women played important roles as well, managing estates, defending castles, and sometimes even leading troops in battle. The stories of women such as Tomo Gozen, a legendary female samurai, became part of the folklore of the age. The Sengoku period left a deep mark on the Japanese psyche. The ideals of loyalty, bravery, and self-sacrifice became central to the identity of the samurai and the nation as a whole. The castles, temples, and gardens built during this time still stand as reminders of both the violence and the beauty of the era. The unification of Japan under the Tokugawa shogunate brought an end to the chaos, but the legacy of the Sengoku period would continue to shape the country for generations. As the dust settled and the swords were sheathed, Japan stood on the threshold of a new age. The Tokugawa shoguns would rule for more than 2 centuries, bringing peace, stability, and isolation. But the memory of the warring states, the rise and fall of great leaders, and the spirit of the samurai would never be forgotten. The Sengoku period was a time when Japan was forged in the fires of war, and from those fires emerged a nation ready to face the challenges of the future. When the smoke of the Sengoku Wars finally cleared, Japan was a land transformed, the chaos and violence of the warring states had given way to a new era of peace, order, and stability under the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu was granted the title of shogun by the emperor, and he established his government in the city of Edo, which would later become Tokyo. The Tokugawa shogunate would rule Japan for more than 2.5 centuries, shaping the country in ways that still echo today. The Tokugawa era, also known as the Edo period, was marked by a strict social order, economic growth, and a policy of national isolation. The shogunate created a rigid class system, with the samurai at the top, followed by farmers, artisans, and merchants. The emperor remained in Kyoto as a symbolic figure, but real power rested with the shogun and his network of loyal daimyo, or feudal lords. The Tokugawa shoguns were determined to prevent the kind of chaos that had torn Japan apart during the Sengoku period. To do this, they implemented a system known as sankenkatai, or alternate attendance. Daimyo were required to spend every other year in Edo, leaving their families behind as virtual hostages when they returned to their domains. This policy kept the daimyo under close watch and drained their resources, making rebellion difficult. The samurai, once fierce warriors, became bureaucrats and administrators. They managed the affairs of their lords, collected taxes, and enforced the laws of the shogunate. Many samurai struggled to adapt to this new role, as the need for constant warfare faded and the arts of peace became more important. Some turned to poetry, calligraphy, and the tea ceremony, seeking meaning and honor in a world without battle. The Tokugawa shogunate also imposed strict controls on society. Travel was regulated, weapons were restricted, and the movement of people was closely monitored. The shogunate banned Christianity, which had spread during the Sengoku period, and expelled foreign missionaries. Japanese who refused to renounce the foreign faith faced persecution, torture, and death. The shogunate feared that Christianity could undermine their authority and open the door to foreign influence. Perhaps the most famous policy of the Tokugawa era was sakoku, or national isolation. For more than 200 years, Japan closed its doors to the outside world. Foreign trade was limited to a few Dutch and Chinese merchants in the port of Nagasaki. Japanese were forbidden to travel abroad, and those who left could not return. The shogunate sought to protect Japan from the chaos and corruption they believed came from foreign lands. Despite this isolation, the Edo period was a time of remarkable growth and creativity. The population of Japan doubled, cities flourished, and the economy expanded. Edo became one of the largest cities in the world, with more than 1 million people. The city was a marvel of organization, with clean streets, fire brigades, and a vibrant urban culture that the merchant class, once considered the lowest in society, grew wealthy and influential. They sponsored the arts, built theaters, and created a lively world of entertainment known as ukiyo, or the floating world. Kabuki theater, with its colorful costumes and dramatic stories, became wildly popular. Woodblock prints, or ukiyo-e, captured scenes of city life, landscapes, and famous actors, spreading art and beauty to people of all classes. The Edo period was also a time of peace. For more than 2 centuries, Japan was free from the large-scale wars that had plagued its past. The samurai, though no longer needed as warriors, maintained their traditions of discipline, loyalty, and honor. The arts of swordsmanship, archery, and horseback riding were practiced alongside poetry, painting, and the tea ceremony. The ideals of Bushido, the way of the warrior, continued to shape the values of the samurai and the nation. Life in the countryside was shaped by the rhythms of the seasons and the demands of rice farming. Villages were close-knit communities, bound by tradition and mutual support. Festivals, rituals, and local shrines brought people together to celebrate the cycles of nature and the blessings of the kami, or spirits. The shogunate maintained order through a network of officials, magistrates, and spies. Justice was swift and often harsh, with punishments ranging from exile to execution. The laws were clear, and the expectations of behavior were strict. Yet, within these boundaries, people found ways to express themselves, to innovate, and to enjoy life. Education flourished during the Edo period. Temple schools taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to children of all classes. Samurai studied Confucian philosophy, history, and the Chinese classics. The spread of literacy created a vibrant world of books, poetry, and popular fiction. The haiku, a short form of poetry, became a beloved art, capturing the beauty of a moment in just 17 syllables. The Edo period was also a time of scientific and technological progress. Japanese scholars studied medicine, astronomy, and engineering, often using Dutch books and knowledge brought by the few foreign traders allowed in Nagasaki. New techniques in agriculture, irrigation, and construction improved the lives of ordinary people. Despite the peace and prosperity, the Tokugawa system was not without its problems. The rigid class structure created tensions as merchants grew rich while samurai struggled with debt and declining incomes. Peasant uprisings and protests broke out in times of famine or hardship. The shogunate responded with reforms, but the underlying issues remained. In the early 19th century, the world began to change in ways that Japan could not ignore. Western powers, driven by trade and imperial ambition, began to press against Japan's closed doors. Russian ships appeared in the north, and British and American vessels sailed along the coasts. The shogunate tried to maintain its isolation, but the pressure was mounting. The turning point came in 1853, when Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States arrived in Edo Bay with a fleet of black ships. Perry demanded that Japan open its ports to American trade, and the shogunate, unable to resist, agreed. The Treaty of Kanagawa, signed in 1854, ended more than 2 centuries of isolation and opened Japan to the world. The arrival of the Westerners brought both excitement and fear. New ideas, technologies, and goods flooded into Japan. Steamships, telegraphs, and railways appeared. Western clothing, food, and customs fascinated some and alarmed others. The old order was shaken, and the authority of the shogunate began to crumble. As the Tokugawa shogunate weakened, opposition grew among samurai, merchants, and intellectuals who wanted to modernize Japan and restore power to the emperor. The slogan, "Sano Joy," revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, became a rallying cry for reform. In 1868, after years of unrest and conflict, the shogunate was overthrown in a brief but dramatic civil war. The emperor was restored to power, and the Meiji Restoration began. The Edo period was over, and a new era of transformation had begun. The Tokugawa shogunate left a deep and lasting legacy. The peace and stability of the Edo period allowed Japanese culture to flourish, creating a rich tradition of art, literature, and social order. The values of discipline, loyalty, and harmony shaped the character of the nation. The rigid class system and policy of isolation preserved Japan's unique identity, but also left it vulnerable to the shocks of the modern world. As Japan opened its doors and embraced change, the lessons of the Edo period would guide its journey into the future. The fall of the Tokugawa Shogunate marked the beginning of one of the most extraordinary transformations in world history. In the mid-19th century, Japan was a country that had been closed to the outside world for more than 200 years. Its people lived by ancient customs, its rulers clung to old ways, and its society was divided by rigid class lines. Yet, in just a few decades, Japan would become a modern nation, a world power, and a symbol of rapid change. This is the story of the Meiji Restoration and the modernization of Japan. The seeds of change were planted long before the shogunate fell. As Western ships appeared off Japan's coasts, bringing new technologies and demands for trade, many Japanese realized that their country could not remain isolated forever. The arrival of Commodore Perry's black ships in 1853 was a shock to the nation. The Americans brought steam-powered vessels, cannons, and a message from the President of the United States demanding that Japan open its ports. The shogunate, unable to resist, signed treaties with the Americans and other Western powers. These treaties, known as the Unequal Treaties, gave foreigners special rights and privileges, undermined Japanese sovereignty, and angered many people. The opening of Japan to the world brought both excitement and fear. New ideas, goods, and technologies flooded into the country. Steamships, railways, telegraphs, and factories appeared. Western clothing, food, and customs fascinated some and alarmed others. The old order was shaken, and the authority of the shogunate began to crumble. Discontent spread among the samurai, merchants, and intellectuals. Many believed that Japan needed to change in order to survive. The slogan "Sano Joy," revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, became a rallying cry for reform. Some wanted to restore power to the emperor, while others sought to modernize the country along Western lines. The crisis came to a head in the 1860s. The shogunate faced rebellions, assassinations, and growing opposition from powerful domains such as Satsuma and Choshu. In 1868, after a brief but dramatic civil war, the shogunate was overthrown. The emperor, a young man named Mutsuhito, was restored to power. He took the name Meiji, meaning enlightened rule, and the Meiji era began. The Meiji Restoration was not just a change of rulers. It was a revolution in every sense of the word. The new leaders of Japan were determined to build a strong, modern nation that could stand equal with the great powers of the world. They looked to the West for inspiration, but they also sought to preserve the spirit and identity of Japan. The first task was to centralize power. The old feudal domains were abolished, and the daimyo were ordered to return their lands to the folim and to the mons to the emperor. The country was divided into prefectures, each governed by officials appointed by the central government. The samurai lost their privileges, their right to carry swords, and their hereditary stipends. Many samurai struggled to adapt. Some became bureaucrats or teachers, while others joined the army or police. The class system was dismantled, and all Japanese were declared equal before the law. The government launched a program of rapid modernization. They sent students and officials abroad to study Western science, technology, and institutions. They invited foreign experts to Japan to teach everything from engineering to medicine to military tactics. Railways and telegraph lines spread across the country. Modern factories were built, producing textiles, steel, and machinery. The government encouraged industry through loans, subsidies, and the creation of model enterprises. The economy grew at an astonishing rate, and Japan began to export goods to the world. Education was a key part of the Meiji reforms. A national system of schools was established, teaching reading, writing, mathematics, and science. The government promoted literacy, discipline, and loyalty to the emperor. Universities were founded to train engineers, doctors, and administrators. The spread of education created new opportunities for social mobility and innovation. The military was also transformed. The government created a modern conscript army based on the Prussian model. Samurai and commoners alike were required to serve. The Navy was built with British help, and Japanese officers studied in Europe and America. The new armed forces were equipped with modern weapons, uniforms, and tactics. The spirit of Bushido was preserved, but it was now combined with the discipline and organization of the West. The Meiji leaders also reformed the legal system, adopting Western codes of law and creating courts, police, and prisons. They introduced a constitution in 1889, establishing a constitutional monarchy with an elected parliament, the Diet. The emperor remained the symbolic head of state, but real power rested with the oligarchs and bureaucrats who guided the nation. The Meiji era was a time of great change, but it was also a time of tension and conflict. The rapid pace of modernization created winners and losers. Many samurai and peasants lost their traditional roles and struggled to find new places in society. Urbanization brought new opportunities, but also poverty, disease, and social unrest. Strikes, riots, and protests broke out as workers and farmers demanded better conditions. Despite these challenges, Japan's transformation was astonishing. In just a few decades, the country went from a feudal society to a modern industrial nation. The world took notice. Japan defeated China in the First Sino-Japanese War, gaining control of Taiwan and Korea. In 1904-1905, Japan shocked the world by defeating Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, becoming the first Asian power to defeat a major European nation in modern times. These victories gave Japan new confidence and status, but they also set the stage for future conflicts. The Meiji era was also a time of cultural change. Western music, art, and literature became popular, but Japanese traditions were not forgotten. Artists, writers, and thinkers blended old and new, creating a unique modern culture. The kimono and the suit, the tea ceremony and the piano, the haiku and the novel, all found a place in Meiji Japan. The cities grew rapidly. Tokyo, Osaka, and Yokohama became centers of industry, commerce, and culture. Railways and streetcars connected neighborhoods, and electric lights illuminated the night. Department stores, theaters, and cafes offered new forms of entertainment. The countryside changed as well. Farmers adopted new crops and techniques, and rural life became more connected to the cities. The government promoted Shinto as a national religion, building shrines and encouraging loyalty to the emperor. At the same time, Buddhism, Christianity, and new religious movements flourished. The Meiji Restoration was not without its critics. Some feared that Japan was losing its soul, sacrificing tradition for progress. Others worried about the growing power of the military and the ambitions of the government. But for most Japanese, the Meiji era was a time of hope, pride, and possibility. The dream of a strong, modern Japan had become a reality. By the early 20th century, Japan stood as a major world power. Its industries were booming, its military was respected, and its people were more educated and connected than ever before. But new challenges were on the horizon. The pressures of empire, the demands of modernization, and the tensions within society would soon test the nation in ways it had never faced before. By the early 20th century, Japan had transformed itself from a feudal society into a modern industrial power. The world watched with a mixture of admiration and anxiety as Japan's cities grew. Its factories multiplied, and its military became one of the most advanced in Asia. The Meiji Restoration had given the nation a new sense of pride and ambition, and the victories over China and Russia had shown that Japan could compete with the great powers of the world. But with this new strength came new challenges, new ambitions, and new dangers that, as the 20th century began, Japan's leaders looked outward. The country's population was growing rapidly, and the government believed that expansion was necessary to secure resources, markets, and living space for its people. The idea of empire became central to Japanese policy. The government promoted the concept of Greater East Asia, a vision in which Japan would lead and protect the peoples of Asia from Western domination. This vision was both a source of inspiration and a justification for aggression. Japan's first major step toward empire came with the annexation of Korea in 1910. After years of influence and intervention, Japan formally made Korea a colony, imposing Japanese language, culture, and administration. The Korean people resisted, but the Japanese authorities responded with harsh repression. At the same time, Japan continued to expand its influence in Manchuria, a region of northern China rich in resources. The Japanese built railways, established settlements, and competed with Russia and China for control. World War I provided new opportunities for Japan. While the great powers of Europe were locked in conflict, Japan seized German colonies in the Pacific and China. The war also brought economic growth, as Japanese factories supplied goods to the Allies. After the war, Japan joined the League of Nations and participated in international diplomacy. But beneath the surface, tensions were growing. Many Japanese felt that their country was not treated as an equal by the Western powers. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922, which limited the size of Japan's navy, was seen as an insult. Racial discrimination against Japanese immigrants in the United States and other countries fueled resentment. Nationalist and militarist groups gained influence, arguing that Japan needed to assert itself more forcefully on the world stage. The 1920s and 1930s were a time of both hope and anxiety. Japan's cities were vibrant and modern, with electric lights, streetcars, and jazz music. The arts flourished, and new ideas about democracy, women's rights, and social reform spread. But the country was also hit by economic crises, including the Great Depression, which caused unemployment, poverty, and social unrest. Many people lost faith in the government and turned to radical solutions. The military gained increasing power, both in politics and society. Young officers believed that Japan's destiny lay in expansion and conquest. In 1931, Japanese troops staged an incident in Manchuria, using it as a pretext to seize the region and establish the puppet state of Manchukuo. The League of Nations condemned the action, but Japan withdrew from the organization and continued its aggressive policies. In 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China, beginning a brutal and devastating war that would last for 8 years. The conflict was marked by atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre, in which hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians were killed. The war in China drained Japan's resources and isolated the country diplomatically, but the government and military pressed on, convinced that victory was essential for Japan's survival and honor. As the 1940s began, Japan's leaders faced a difficult choice. The United States and other Western powers imposed economic sanctions, cutting off supplies of oil and other vital materials. Japan could either withdraw from its conquests or seek new sources of resources by force. The government chose war. On December 7, 1941, Japanese planes attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, launching Japan into World War II. The attack was a stunning success, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet and giving Japan control of vast territories across Asia and the Pacific. For a time, Japanese forces seemed unstoppable, capturing the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, Indonesia, and many Pacific islands. But the tide soon turned. The United States and its allies regrouped, rebuilt their forces, and began a relentless campaign to push back the Japanese. Fierce battles were fought on land, sea, and air. The war in the Pacific was brutal, with heavy casualties on both sides. The Japanese military, driven by the code of Bushido and the belief in death before surrender, fought with extraordinary determination. Kamikaze pilots crashed their planes into enemy ships, and soldiers defended every island to the last man. The war dragged on. Japan's cities were devastated by bombing raids. Tokyo, Osaka, and other major cities were reduced to rubble. Food and fuel became scarce, and the civilian population suffered terribly. In August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, causing unprecedented destruction and loss of life. The shock of the bombings, combined with the Soviet Union's entry into the war against Japan, forced the government to surrender. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a radio broadcast, bringing World War II to an end. The defeat was a national trauma. Millions of Japanese had died. The country was in ruins, and the people faced an uncertain future. The emperor, once considered a living god, renounced his divinity and became a symbol of the nation's resilience and hope. The American occupation, led by General Douglas MacArthur, began a process of demilitarization, democratization, and reconstruction. The old order was swept away. The military was disbanded, war criminals were tried, and a new constitution was written. The Constitution, adopted in 1947, established a parliamentary democracy, guaranteed civil rights, and renounced war as a means of settling disputes. Women gained the right to vote, and new freedoms of speech, religion, and assembly were enshrined in law. The occupation also brought economic reforms. Land was redistributed from landlords to tenant farmers, breaking the power of the old elite and creating a more equal society. Labor unions were encouraged, and workers gained new rights. The government invested in education, healthcare, and infrastructure, laying the foundation for future growth. The years after the war were difficult. Food was scarce, inflation was rampant, and many people struggled to rebuild their lives. But the Japanese people showed remarkable resilience and determination. They worked together to rebuild their cities, factories, and communities. The spirit of game and endurance and perseverance became a source of strength. The legacy of Imperial Japan and World War II is complex and often painful. The memory of the war, the suffering it caused, and the crimes committed by the military continued to shape Japan's national identity and its relations with its neighbors. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain powerful symbols of the horrors of war and the need for peace. Yet, from the ashes of defeat, Japan would rise again, embarking on a new journey of recovery, growth, and transformation. In the aftermath of World War II, Japan was a nation in ruins. Its cities lay in ashes, its industries destroyed, and its people faced hunger, homelessness, and uncertainty. The trauma of defeat was deep, and the future seemed uncertain. Yet, from this devastation, Japan would rise to become one of the world's most prosperous and innovative countries. The story of post-war Japan is one of resilience, determination, and transformation, a journey from defeat to recovery, and from recovery to an economic miracle that astonished the world. The American occupation, led by General Douglas MacArthur, began in 1945 and lasted until 1952. The goals of the occupation were clear: to demilitarize, democratize, and rebuild Japan. The old order was swept away. The military was disbanded, and war criminals were put on trial. The emperor, once considered divine, became a symbol of the nation and renounced his claim to godhood. A new constitution was written, establishing a parliamentary democracy, guaranteeing civil rights, and renouncing war as a means of settling disputes. Women gained the right to vote, and new freedoms of speech, religion, and assembly were enshrined. In law, land reform was one of the most important changes. Large estates were broken up, and land was redistributed to tenant farmers. This created a more equal society and gave millions of people a stake in the nation's future. Labor unions were encouraged, and workers gained new rights. The government invested in education, health care, and infrastructure, laying the foundation for future growth. The years after the war were difficult. Food was scarce, inflation was rampant, and many people struggled to rebuild their lives. Black markets flourished, and the scars of war were everywhere. Yet, the Japanese people showed remarkable resilience and determination. They worked together to rebuild their cities, factories, and communities. The spirit of game and endurance and perseverance became a source of strength as the occupation ended in 1952. Japan regained its independence and began to chart its own course. The Cold War was heating up, and the United States saw Japan as a key ally in the struggle against communism. American aid and investment flowed into the country, helping to rebuild industries and infrastructure. The Korean War, which began in 1950, provided a major boost to the Japanese economy, as American forces ordered supplies and equipment from Japanese factories. The government, led by a series of conservative prime ministers, pursued policies that encouraged growth and stability. The Ministry of International Trade and Industry, or MITI, played a central role in guiding the economy, supporting key industries, and promoting exports. Japanese companies adopted new technologies, improved quality, and focused on efficiency. The result was a period of rapid economic growth that became known as the Japanese economic miracle. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Japan's economy grew at an astonishing rate. Factories hummed with activity, producing cars, electronics, steel, and textiles. Japanese brands such as Toyota, Honda, Sony, and Panasonic became household names. Around the world, the standard of living rose, and millions of people moved from the countryside to the cities in search of work and opportunity. Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya became centers of industry, commerce, and culture. The government invested heavily in infrastructure, building highways, bullet trains, and modern airports. The Shinkansen, or bullet train, debuted in 1964, symbolizing Japan's technological prowess and connecting cities at unprecedented speeds. The 1964 Tokyo Olympics showcased Japan's recovery and modernization to the world, marking its return. As a respected member of the international community, education was a key factor in Japan's success. The government promoted universal education, and schools emphasized discipline, hard work, and group harmony. Universities produced engineers, scientists, and managers who drove innovation and growth. The Japanese workforce became known for its skill, dedication, and teamwork. The culture of lifetime employment, company loyalty, and group decision-making created stable and productive organizations. The arts and culture flourished as well. Japanese cinema, literature, and music gained international recognition. Directors, such as Akira Kurosawa and Yasujiro Ozu, created masterpieces that influenced filmmakers around the world. Manga and anime became global phenomena, capturing the imagination of young people everywhere. Traditional arts such as tea ceremony, flower arranging, and calligraphy continued to be cherished, while new forms of pop culture emerged. Society changed rapidly. The old class system faded, and a new middle class emerged. Women gained more opportunities in education and the workforce, though challenges remained. Urban life brought new freedoms and choices, but also new pressures and stresses. The countryside changed as well, as rural communities adapted to modern life and struggled with the population and aging. The environment became a concern as rapid industrialization led to pollution and health problems. The government responded with regulations and cleanup efforts, and Japan became a leader in environmental technology and conservation. Japan's foreign policy focused on peace, stability, and economic cooperation. The country maintained a close alliance with the United States, hosting American military bases, and relying on the U.S. for security. Japan renounced war and maintained only a self-defense force, but it played an active role in international organizations and development aid. Relations with neighboring countries were sometimes strained by memories of the war, but Japan worked to build ties with China, Korea, and other Asian nations. The economic miracle continued into the 1970s and 1980s. Japan became the world's second largest economy, and its products were known for quality and innovation. The country enjoyed prosperity, stability, and a high standard of living. The salaryman became a symbol of the era, hardworking, loyal, and dedicated to the company. The culture of group harmony, consensus, and respect for authority shaped both business and society. Yet, beneath the surface, challenges were growing. The economy became increasingly dependent on exports, and competition from other countries intensified. The real estate and stock market boomed, creating a bubble that would eventually burst. In the early 1990s, Japan entered a period of stagnation, known as the Lost Decade. Growth slowed, unemployment rose, and the country faced new social and economic problems. Despite these challenges, Japan remained a leader in technology, innovation, and culture. The country continued to produce world-class products, from cars and electronics to fashion and cuisine. Japanese pop culture, manga, anime, video games, and music became a global force, influencing trends and tastes around the world. Spirit of resilience, adaptability, and creativity that had carried Japan through war and recovery continued to shape its journey. The story of post-war Japan is a testament to the power of determination, cooperation, and vision. From the ashes of defeat, the Japanese people built a society that combined tradition and modernity, discipline and innovation, harmony and individuality. The journey was not without pain or struggle, but it was marked by hope, pride, and the belief in a better future. In the 21st century, Japan stands as a nation of remarkable contrasts. It is a country where ancient shrines and temples sit quietly among neon-lit skyscrapers, where centuries-old traditions are honored alongside cutting-edge technology, and where the spirit of resilience and innovation continues to shape the lives of its people. The story of modern Japan is one of both continuity and change, of challenges faced and opportunities embraced, and of a society that looks to the future while never forgetting its past. Japan's cities are among the most dynamic and vibrant in the world. Tokyo, the capital, is a sprawling metropolis of more than 30 million people, a place where the latest trends in fashion, technology, and entertainment are born. The city pulses with energy, from the bustling streets of Shibuya and Shinjuku to the quiet gardens of the Imperial Palace. Osaka, known for its food and humor, is a center of commerce and culture. Kyoto, the ancient capital, preserves the beauty of traditional Japan with its temples, gardens, and geisha districts. Sapporo, Fukuoka, Nagoya, and other cities each have their own unique character and charm. The Japanese economy remains one of the largest and most advanced in the world. The country is a global leader in technology, robotics, and engineering. Japanese companies produce some of the world's best cars, electronics, and industrial equipment. The Shinkansen, or bullet train, continues to set standards for speed, safety, and efficiency. Japan's infrastructure is modern and reliable, with clean cities, efficient public transport, and a high standard of living. Yet the economy faces significant challenges. After decades of rapid growth, Japan has struggled with slow economic expansion, deflation, and an aging population. The burst of the economic bubble in the 1990s led to years of stagnation, known as the lost decades. The government has tried various policies to stimulate growth, including monetary easing, fiscal stimulus, and structural reforms. While there have been successes, many challenges remain. One of the most pressing issues is demographics. Japan has one of the world's oldest populations, with a median age over 48. The birth rate is low, and the population is shrinking. Rural areas are losing residents, and many villages face extinction. The workforce is aging, and there are concerns about how to support the growing number of elderly citizens. The government has encouraged women and older people to join the workforce, promoted work-life balance, and considered opening the country to more immigration. These changes are slow and sometimes controversial, but they are essential for Japan's future. Education remains a cornerstone of Japanese society. Schools emphasize discipline, respect, and group harmony. Students work hard, and competition for university places is intense. Japanese universities are respected, and the country produces world-class scientists, engineers, and artists. At the same time, there is growing debate about how to foster creativity, individuality, and global skills in a rapidly changing world. The pressure of exams and conformity can be intense, and there are calls for reform to make education more flexible and innovative. Japanese culture continues to captivate the world. Manga and anime are global phenomena, enjoyed by millions of fans across continents. Japanese video games, music, and fashion influence trends from New York to Paris to Seoul. The country's cuisine, sushi, ramen, tempura, and more is celebrated for its taste, artistry, and health benefits. Traditional arts such as tea ceremony, flower arranging, calligraphy, and martial arts are still practiced and cherished. Festivals, rituals, and seasonal celebrations bring communities together and connect people to their heritage. Society in Japan is both modern and deeply rooted in tradition. The values of harmony, respect, and group belonging shape daily life. Neighborhood associations, company loyalty, and family ties remain important. At the same time, young people are exploring new ways of living, working, and expressing themselves. There is a growing interest in entrepreneurship, startups, and creative industries. The internet and social media have opened new worlds of connection and opportunity. Japan faces natural challenges as well. The country is located on the Pacific Ring of Fire, making it prone to earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. the memory of the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami, which caused massive destruction and triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster, is still fresh. The response to these disasters showed the resilience, discipline, and compassion of the Japanese people. Communities came together to rebuild, and the government invested in disaster preparedness and recovery. Environmental issues are also a concern. Japan has made progress in reducing pollution, promoting recycling, and developing green technologies. The country is a leader in energy efficiency, public transport, and sustainable urban planning. Yet, challenges remain, including the need to reduce carbon emissions, manage waste, and protect natural resources. Japan's role in the world has evolved. The country is a key ally of the United States and plays an active role in international organizations such as the United Nations, the G7, and the World Trade Organization. Japan provides development aid, participates in peacekeeping missions, and promotes global cooperation on issues such as climate change, health, and security. Relations with neighboring countries are sometimes complicated by history, territorial disputes, and regional tensions. Japan has worked to build better ties with China, Korea, and other Asian nations, while also strengthening its alliances with Western countries. Politics in Japan is stable, but sometimes criticized for being slow to change. The Liberal Democratic Party has dominated government for most of the post-war period. There are debates about constitutional reform, defense policy, and the role of the emperor. The Japanese Constitution, written during the American occupation, renounces war and limits the military to self-defense. In recent years, there has been discussion about how to respond to new security challenges in the region. The Japanese people continue to value peace, safety, and social harmony. Crime rates are low, and the streets are safe. Public services are efficient, and the quality of life is high. At the same time, there are concerns about inequality, poverty, and social isolation, especially among the elderly and young people. Mental health, work-life balance, and the pressures of modern life are topics of growing importance. Japan's future is both challenging and full of promise. The country's ability to adapt, innovate, and draw on its rich heritage gives it unique strengths. The spirit of game and endurance and perseverance remains a guiding force. As Japan faces the 21st century, it does so with a sense of responsibility to its people, its neighbors, and the world. The story of Japan is far from over. It is a story of resilience, creativity, and hope, a story that continues to inspire and fascinate people everywhere.